I literally paused mid-bite, the fork clattering against my plate, the half-chewed salad suddenly tasting like ash. "What did you say, Dad?" My voice was barely a whisper, yet it felt like a scream in the quiet restaurant. He took a sip of his water, his eyes flicking away for a split second before meeting mine. A hint of something I couldn't quite decipher. Pride? Annoyance? In their depths. Exactly what you heard. Candace Harvey signed the prenup. Money well spent. He even managed a slight smile, as if this was a job well done. My mind reeled. A prenup? Drafted by him? Months ago? Dad, what are you talking about? We haven't even discussed a prenup. Harvey and I planned to talk about it mutually, if we ever decided we needed one, much later. The idea of it wasn't foreign, given my dad's constant harping on financial protection. But this was an ambush. He sighed, setting down his glass with a deliberate thud. Candace, you know how important your financial security is to me, especially with how much I'm contributing to this wedding. I just wanted to make sure everything was above board. I had my associate draft a simple, ironclad agreement. It protects your assets, secures your future. Common sense, really. Common sense? Behind my back? And Harvey agreed to it? The words were an accusation, directed at both of them. How could you do this, Dad? To me? To us? He scoffed, shaking his head slightly. Look, I approached him a few months ago. Explained that while I fully supported your union, it was just a formality. Standard procedure for someone in your position. I even offered him a token of appreciation for his understanding and cooperation, a substantial sum, to ensure there were no hard feelings, and he saw the logic in it. He signed it. No fuss. See? Smart move. Now we don't have to worry. A token of appreciation, a substantial sum. He bought my fiancé. He bought him. The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. My father, the man who supposedly loved and protected me, had essentially paid off the man I was about to marry, all without my knowledge or consent. And Harvey, the man who had knelt on one knee in Rome, promising me forever, had taken the money and kept the secret. I pushed my plate away, my appetite completely gone. The room seemed to spin. My fiancé, my partner, the person I trusted implicitly, had colluded with my controlling father to create a legally binding document that would determine the future of my marriage, and he hadn't said a word. The betrayal was a cold, sharp knife twisting in my gut. I have to go, I choked out, pushing back my chair. I didn't wait for his response. Didn't care about the unfinished lunch or the confused glance from the waiter. I just needed to get away, to breathe, to understand. I drove straight to our apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. My mind raced, replaying every moment with Harvey, searching for a sign, a clue, anything that would explain this deception. He was home, scrolling through his phone on the sofa, looking perfectly innocent, perfectly content. He looked up, smiling. "Hey, you're back early. How was lunch with your dad?" The casualness of his tone, the easy smile, felt like a fresh wound. I stood in the doorway, my voice trembling. "How could you, Harvey? How could you sign that prenup, and how could you not tell me?" His smile vanished. His face went pale, and he slowly, carefully, put his phone down. "Candace, what are you talking about?" He tried to feign ignorance, but the shift in his posture, the quick dart of his eyes, betrayed him. "Don't lie to me." My voice cracked. "My dad just told me. He offered you money, a substantial sum to sign a prenup he drafted months ago. Is that true, Harvey? Did you take his money? And did you keep this from me for months?" He closed his eyes for a moment, then let out a defeated sigh. "Candace, please, let me explain. Your dad, he's a force of nature. He basically cornered me. He made it sound like it was just a formality, a way to put his mind at ease, given his investments in the wedding. He said if I didn't sign, he implied he'd make things very difficult. For both of us. He said he didn't want you to be stressed, that he'd handle it. And the money, Harvey?" I pressed, tears stinging my eyes. "Did you take it?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. He said it was a gesture of goodwill, for my cooperation. I never saw it as buying me out, I swear. I thought he was just being overbearing, like he usually is. I genuinely didn't want to upset you. I thought if you knew, you'd be angry at him, and it would cause a huge fight before the wedding. I thought it was just a piece of paper, and we could talk about it later, after the wedding, when things were settled. I was going to tell you eventually, I promise. After the wedding? When it would be too late? When you'd already been bought and paid for? The words tasted bitter. This isn't just a piece of paper, Harvey. This is about trust. This is about us. You colluded with my father, behind my back. You took his money. You let him manipulate our relationship. How can I ever trust you again, knowing you're capable of something like this? The perfect Roman proposal, the shared dreams, the excitement for our future. It all crumbled into dust around me. The man I was due to marry in 2 weeks was standing before me, exposed not just as someone who yielded to pressure, but as someone who could deceive me so thoroughly. The wedding, the one I had poured my heart into, the one my dad had so generously offered to pay for, was canceled. Not postponed. Canceled. It was a brutal decision, but there was no other choice. How could I walk down the aisle towards a man who had already shown me he couldn't be transparent, couldn't be truly honest, especially not when money was involved? How could I marry a man who had allowed himself to be bought by my controlling father, and then kept it a secret from me for months? It's been 2 months now. The caterers were paid cancellation fees, the venue rebooked. The dress is still hanging in my closet. A beautiful, haunting reminder of a future that evaporated. I'm living alone in our apartment now, the silence loud with the echoes of what almost was. My father calls regularly, still convinced he did the right thing, still oblivious to the depth of his transgression, or perhaps simply unconcerned. Harvey calls too, sometimes, full of apologies and explanations. But the trust is irrevocably broken. I found my person, I thought. But it turned out, I found 2 faces, one I loved, and one I never knew, bought and sold behind my back. The apartment feels vast now, too big for just me. Every corner holds a memory. The kitchen where Harvey taught me his grandmother's pasta recipe, the living room where we'd binge watch our favorite shows, the bedroom where he proposed to me on a messy Sunday morning. Now, the silence is punctuated only by the hum of the refrigerator or the distant city noise. I've tried to redecorate, to erase the ghosts, but they linger, embedded in the very walls. My dad's calls are the most infuriating. Are you feeling better, honey? I told you it was for the best. You deserve someone who won't buckle under pressure. He genuinely believes he saved me from a weak man, rather than acknowledging he was the architect of my heartbreak. I've tried to explain it to him, to make him understand that his actions didn't protect me. They shattered my faith in the people I loved most. But he just laughs, a dismissive, booming sound over the phone. Candace, you're being overly dramatic. It's business. He took the money, didn't he? Proves my point. There's no reaching him. It's like talking to a brick wall coated in Teflon. Nothing sticks. Our relationship, once complicated but loving, is now a chasm of resentment and misunderstanding. I've started letting his calls go to voicemail more often than not. Harvey's calls are different. They're laced with genuine remorse, with a raw pain that I can almost feel through the phone. He recounts the pressure my dad put him under, the carefully worded threats veiled as friendly advice, the promise of an easier path. He tells me he was scared of my dad, scared of losing me, and that taking the money felt like the only way to appease him and keep the peace until he could explain. He says he hated himself every day he kept the secret, but the longer it went on, the harder it became to confess. He begs for another chance, for me to understand his fear, his desperation. He promises he's a changed man, that he's learned his lesson about honesty and standing up for himself. And a part of me, the part that still remembers the kind, funny, adventurous man I fell in love with, wants to believe him, wants to forgive him. The loneliness in this apartment is a potent sedative to anger. But then I remember the cold dread in my stomach when my dad casually dropped the prenup bomb, the image of Harvey's pale face, the quick dart of his eyes that betrayed him even before he confessed. I remember the months of lies, the easy smiles, the plans we made for a future built on a foundation of sand. He didn't just buckle under pressure, he actively participated in the deception. He took the money. He made a choice. And that choice stripped away the very bedrock of our relationship, trust. It's not just about the prenup, Harvey, I told him during our last call, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. It's about what it revealed. About who you are when faced with a choice between honesty and convenience, between me and my father's money. You chose the money, you chose the easy way out, and you let my father believe he could buy you, buy our future. He was silent for a long moment, then a choked sound, like a sob. Candace, please. No, Harvey, I can't. I don't think I'll ever be able to look at you and not see his shadow, not wonder what else you're capable of hiding. The trust is gone, and without it, there's nothing left. I ended the call, and for the first time in weeks, his number hasn't appeared on my screen since. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the deafening silence of grief or betrayal. It was the quiet of a wound finally beginning to scar over. My friends have been incredibly supportive, though their pity is a hard pill to swallow. My sister, Sarah, has been my rock, listening without judgment, bringing me takeout and forcing me out for walks. She doesn't offer solutions, just presence. I've started going to therapy. It's helping me untangle the complex knot of emotions, the anger at Harvey, the profound disappointment in my father, the shame of being so blindsided. I'm learning that my worth isn't tied to a wedding, or a partner, or my father's approval. I'm learning to trust my own judgment again, to advocate for myself, and to recognize the subtle manipulations that I once brushed off as dad being dad. The wedding dress still hangs in the closet. Some days I want to burn it. Other days I just stare at it, a symbol of what I almost had, and what I narrowly escaped. I don't know what my future holds. There's no new person on the horizon, no grand plan, just me, in this now silent apartment. Slowly, carefully, rebuilding myself from the ground up. I'm learning that some battles, even when they leave you bruised and broken, can ultimately set you free. And for the first time in a long time, that thought doesn't feel like ash. It feels like hope. The months that followed were a testament to that hope. I began to truly inhabit this apartment, not just endure it. I repainted the living room a vibrant teal, a color Harvey would have hated, and reconfigured the furniture, pushing out the ghosts bit by bit. I signed up for a pottery class, getting my hands dirty, shaping something tangible and beautiful from nothing but clay and intention. It was messy, often frustrating, but profoundly grounding. My father's calls dwindled. After a particularly blunt conversation where I told him I needed space to heal from his actions, not just Harvey's, he finally seemed to get a flicker of the message, or perhaps just got tired of my silence. The distance, while painful, felt like a necessary amputation for my own emotional survival. Harvey's number remained blocked. The grief for him, for us, was no longer a raw wound, but a dull ache, a scar I carried, a reminder of a valuable, albeit brutal, lesson. And the dress? One crisp autumn afternoon, I took it off its hanger. It shimmered in the light, exquisitely crafted, and I felt a pang, not of regret, but of acceptance. It wasn't a symbol of failure, but of a path not taken, a bullet dodged. I carefully folded it, wrapped it in tissue paper, and placed it in a box labeled past, not to be forgotten, but to be acknowledged, honored for the dream it once held, and then filed away. My future was unwritten, unbought, and entirely my own. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like the most luxurious freedom of all. The months that followed were a testament to that hope. I began to truly inhabit this apartment, not just endure it. I repainted the living room a vibrant teal, a color Harvey would have hated, and reconfigured the furniture, pushing out the ghosts bit by bit. I signed up for a pottery class, getting my hands dirty, shaping something tangible and beautiful from nothing but clay and intention. It was messy, often frustrating, but profoundly grounding. My father's calls dwindled. After a particularly blunt conversation where I told him I needed space to heal from his actions, not just Harvey's, he finally seemed to get a flicker of the message, or perhaps just got tired of my silence. The distance, while painful, felt like a necessary amputation for my own emotional survival. Harvey's number remained blocked. The grief for him, for us, was no longer a raw wound, but a dull ache, a scar I carried, a reminder of a valuable, albeit brutal, lesson. And the dress? One crisp autumn afternoon, I took it off its hanger. It shimmered in the light, exquisitely crafted, and I felt a pang, not of regret, but of acceptance. It wasn't a symbol of failure, but of a path not taken, a bullet dodged. I carefully folded it, wrapped it in tissue paper, and placed it in a box labeled past, not to be forgotten, but to be acknowledged, honored for the dream it once held, and then filed away. My future was unwritten, unbought, and entirely my own. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like the most luxurious freedom of all. This newfound freedom wasn't an explosion of wild abandon, but rather a quiet unfolding. I started saying yes to things I would have previously dismissed: an impromptu weekend trip to a small coastal town with a colleague, a foraging walk in the woods, even a late-night documentary series on astrophysics. My evenings, once spent waiting for Harvey's call or planning our next us activity, were now filled with books, long hot baths, or simply sitting in silence, listening to the city hum outside my window. I cooked for myself, not for two, experimenting with spices and flavors I'd never bothered with before. The kitchen, once a place of shared meals and hurried breakfasts, became my culinary laboratory. I reconnected with old friends, women I'd inadvertently drifted from during my tunnel vision with Harvey. They listened without judgment, celebrated my resilience, and reminded me of the complexities and joys of female friendship. We talked about everything from career ambitions to bad dates, from societal pressures to the simple pleasure of a good cup of coffee. Their presence was a balm, a reminder that my world was far larger than the confines of a single relationship. My father, John, sent me an elaborate gift basket for my birthday, a clear attempt to bridge the gap without the awkwardness of a phone call. It was filled with artisanal cheeses and expensive chocolates, things he knew I liked. There was no card, just his typical, somewhat clumsy attempt at an olive branch. I didn't call him to thank him, but I didn't send it back either. I shared the chocolates with my friends and ate the cheese slowly, savoring the fact that I was now able to accept a gesture of peace without feeling obligated to immediately reciprocate or forgive. It was progress, in its own quiet way. The pottery class became more than just a hobby. It was a weekly meditation. I learned patience, the beauty of imperfection, and the power of shaping my own reality. There were days when the clay crumbled, or my piece collapsed, and I had to start over. But each failure taught me something new, made me stronger, more persistent. Just like life, my career too began to shift. With a clearer head, I found myself more engaged, more assertive in meetings, more willing to take on challenging projects. I realized that for years, a part of me had been mentally preparing for a life that would eventually revolve around a home, a husband, maybe, children. Now, that eventually was gone, replaced by an expansive, exhilarating now. I wasn't racing towards a predetermined finish line. I was simply existing, creating, and discovering, one beautiful, unexpected day at a time. The future wasn't just unwritten, it was a blank canvas, and I, Candace, was finally holding the brush. The future wasn't just unwritten, it was a blank canvas, and I, Candace, was finally holding the brush. One crisp Saturday morning, as I was leaving my pottery class, still dusted with clay, I spotted him. Harvey. He was standing outside the coffee shop across the street, laughing with someone I didn't recognize, a woman with bright red hair. My breath hitched, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. But it wasn't from shock or pain. It was more like the ghost of an old reflex. He looked the same, impeccably dressed, that familiar slight tilt of his head when he found something genuinely amusing. For a fleeting second, I wondered if he'd spot me, if his eyes would sweep across the street and land on the woman in paint-stained jeans and a messy bun, barely recognizable as the bride he almost married. But he didn't. And I felt nothing, or rather, a quiet certainty. The ache for him had truly vanished, replaced by a sense of calm detachment. He was a chapter, closed, A lesson learned. The memory was no longer raw, no longer even particularly poignant. It was just a fact of my past, like the history of an old house I used to admire but no longer lived in. I walked past the coffee shop, not bothering to duck or hide. I kept my stride even, my head held high. My life no longer revolved around his presence or absence. He hadn't changed, at least not visibly. And neither had I, in terms of my core values. But I had changed in the most profound way. I had become whole on my own. I got home, showered the clay off, and put on my favorite record. The notes filled the apartment, a melody of independence. I didn't hate him, didn't wish him ill. I simply understood that our paths had diverged. And mine, though unexpected, was so much more truly mine. The canvas was still blank, but the first confident brushstrokes were already there, vibrant and true. It was a stark contrast to those agonizing weeks after my father's call. My gut feeling, a persistent whisper I'd tried to dismiss for months, had been a blaring siren after all. Dad, ever the protector, had noticed Harvey's evasiveness, his increasingly elaborate excuses. He'd hired a private investigator, a quiet man who worked quickly and efficiently, unveiling a truth far more sordid than I could have imagined. Harvey, my fiancé, the man I was about to marry, had a wife and a young son living just 2 towns over. The shock had been a physical blow, a sudden vacuum in my chest. The investigator's final chilling detail was the worst. Harvey's plan had been to introduce them to me on our honeymoon, to propose polygamy. The audacity, the utter betrayal, was breathtaking. The initial aftermath had been a blur of phone calls, tears, and a righteous cold fury I hadn't known I possessed. Dad had been my rock, navigating the legalities and ensuring Harvey couldn't approach me. We didn't talk much about it, not directly about the pain, but the shared experience of his deception had, ironically, begun to mend the long-standing rift between us. Days after my birthday, Dad called. Not about the basket, but about a new exhibition at the city gallery, one he knew I'd appreciate. We talked for an hour, our first truly easy conversation in years, discussing art and life, carefully avoiding the chasm that had once defined our relationship. It was another quiet brushstroke on my growing canvas, a sign that perhaps this new life didn't have to be lived entirely alone. My apartment, once filled with ghosts of a shared future, now hummed with my own vibrant energy. The pottery wheel sat in the corner, a testament to my ability to create something beautiful from nothing. My bookshelf overflowed with new reads. My playlist was a soundtrack of self-discovery. I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. I was simply living, breathing, and painting my future, one deliberate, joyful stroke at a time. The canvas was no longer intimidatingly blank. It was a burgeoning masterpiece, and I, Candace, was its delighted, confident artist.